I mean, for me, I have a very simplistic view about fiction. I mean, I obviously believe as a fiction writer that fiction has a great part to play in our society and our culture. But for me, I have a very simplistic view about novels. I sort of fundamentally believe that there's three types of novel. There's your action-packed, page-turning potboiler, which you find in a carousel at the airport, you pick up to read on the plane, and it makes an 8-hour flight disappear. The sort of novel that you take on holiday, the sort of novel that you comfortably read by the beach because it's not necessarily that mentally taxing. It tends to sort of present you with a hook in the first paragraph or the first chapter, some unanswered question, and you have to read the entire book to get your question resolved. And the question is resolved satisfactorily or not. And there's many, many thousands of these books written, and they're extraordinarily popular, and they sell in their droves for very good reason, and they're very entertaining. But truth be told, perhaps 3 weeks later, if you asked a reader of one of these novels the names or sort of personal relationships of the central character, the plot twists, or this and that and the other, they may not necessarily remember. They're not books that are designed to necessarily change the way that people feel or think about things in general. They're designed purely to entertain people. Like a good action movie, like Die Hard or something like that, it's not necessarily going to change somebody's life, but it will certainly entertain them for 90 minutes. Then you've got essentially what's referred to as literary fiction, and I think there's a sort of snobbish attitude towards literary fiction. I think the early works of Cormac McCarthy, dealing with contemporary authors, the early works of Cormac McCarthy, people like Annie Proulx, great American writers who write great prose, are often criticised for sort of having style over substance. These are the sort of books that you read just simply because the language is so incredible, and because the turn of phrase that the author employs to describe a particular thing is second to none. I am a great fan of this type of writing. I've read a tremendous amount of McCarthy. I've read everything that Annie Proulx has written. I think the things that they do with language are quite unique. They can take, human characteristics and ascribe them to an inanimate object, and they can take the characteristics of an inanimate object and ascribe them to a human being. And you start to look at people and think about people in an entirely different light. But they're the kind of books that are often referred to as Marmite books because you either love them or hate them. I've given, for an example, The Shipping News by Annie Proulx, which I think is a brilliant book, to people, and they've come back after 4 or 5 pages and said it's absolutely unreadable. I can't read this thing. So you do get a very diverse appreciation of these types of novels. Then you've got the third category, which I think is the type of novel any author worth his salt is aspiring to write. And this is the kind of novel that actually spans both camps. It's a novel that presents you with a tremendously compelling narrative, a hook that's just got engaged your interest, literally from page 1. But at the same time, is telling you the story in a language or a prose that is quite remarkable. And whether it be, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, or To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, or Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, these are all subjective choices on my from my viewpoint. People have their own selections. They're the kind of book that you always have a copy of, the kind of book that you suggest other people read, that you recommend that people read. They're the kind of book, when you meet somebody who loves that book, it actually starts a friendship. They're the kind of book that once you've finished it, you kind of feel, to a degree, at a loss for what to read for the next couple of weeks. You search out books by the same author to find out whether or not they have the capacity to replicate the emotional impact that that book had on you. And the truth is that the common denominator of all of those books is that they engage you on an emotional level. That's the true power of fiction, the ability to engage you on an emotional level. And that's the thing I think I'm always trying to do with the things that I write. Not necessarily just writing an interesting or engaging story, but trying to engage you on an emotional level, above and beyond the story itself, to create a character that appeals to you in a particular way, or to create a scenario that actually resonates with you on some kind of a level. So that 3 weeks later, or 6 months later, or a year later, if somebody asks whether or not you read the book, you may not necessarily remember who wrote it, you may not necessarily remember the title, but you certainly never will forget how it made you feel.